Hi, good morning everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me clearly. As introduced, I'm the Vice President for Cloud at VMware for APJ. Very, very excited to be here with you today, along with my colleague Praneet. Migrating to the cloud in mere months, no problem. We'll be talking through today how we're helping customers innovate and get to innovation much more quickly through partnering with AWS. First, the notion of digital smart. Digital customers or cloud native customers have been powering a digital smart business model for a number of years now. And the definition, or what we see as the definition of customers that are leveraging a digital smart mobile approach, is to use automation, machine learning, and to develop modern applications. And so when we talk to customers today, many established incumbents in their markets are wanting to leverage a digital smart model and strategy, which is why we're seeing the accelerated pace for app modernization as incumbents in whether it's healthcare, public sector, banking, insurance are trying to catch up with some of the challenger brands that have been leveraging this technology for a number of years. So 76% of app initiatives today are around modernization and how you move to modern application structures. And when we look forward, we're seeing some 26% growth in cloud migrations over the next 3 years. Now, if you look at what CIOs are being asked to do today, it's deliver modern apps at the speed of business, be able to build and run those applications across a combination of public cloud, data center, and edge locations, and importantly, business transformation that's delivered with enterprise resiliency, security, and operations. So these are some of the challenges that we're seeing in the market and some of the trends that we've been seeing. Now, moving to cloud is not a new notion, but when you look at why customers are moving to cloud, typically there are kind of 4 pillars to the conversation we see with customers. Cost savings obviously is one that comes up. And as you heard in the opening keynote earlier from Eric, looking at things like productivity, resilience, and business agility are kind of key talking points and aspects. Now, over on the left, you have kind of the cost impact of moving to cloud, and over on the right, the business value. Now, there have been a number of studies that have been done, and whilst customers typically focus on the cost impact element of moving to cloud, the most compelling cloud benefits actually come in the other 3 pillars. Now, a number of cloud economic studies have been done by both VMware and AWS, and when you look at it, you look at the value of what cloud delivers to customers, about 8% of that comes from cost savings, but the actual business value improvements that come through staff productivity, operational resilience, and business agility drive the other 90%, 92% of business value of cloud. And you'd have heard that earlier in the opening keynote where they talked about the ability to launch applications much more quickly, to make your developers much more productive, and drive additional resilience across those multiple environments, but especially as you move to cloud. And ultimately, this is really about driving more agility to respond to your customers and your employees' needs as you move forward. Now, when we talk to customers around moving to cloud, and many customers have been on cloud migration journeys for some time, we've undertaken a study, and here you'll see on the graph the period of time that customers have been undertaking their cloud migration journeys. Now, if you look at the right-hand 2 bars, you'll see that more than 50% of organizations have been actively engaged in cloud migrations for multiple years. And if you look at those customers, 42% of them have been engaged in trying to migrate for more than 3 years. Now, what that really means is it's delaying the time to value for customers to get to cloud. Now, when we talk to those customers, what they find is as their cloud migration journey gets drawn out, the cost of the project increases. So they are dual running their environment, so they may be running their on-premise environment in parallel to the cloud environment. They're not getting access to the cloud technologies and the newer modern applications to support and drive their businesses. And so the challenge for those customers is how do they actually accelerate that journey? Now, as we look across APJ today, we're seeing the average migration to cloud native taking anywhere between 16 and 18 months. And that could be for 20% of a customer's workloads. What we're actually able to drive in partnership with AWS using VMware Cloud and AWS, we're actually helping customers move those workloads in months and in some cases weeks. And we're going to dive a bit more into some of the innovation and technology developments we've been driving with AWS to help customers that are running vSphere-based VMware environments in their data centers today move much more quickly and effectively to cloud. So the technology platform that we built working with AWS, which we call VMware Cloud and AWS, brings together the 2 powerhouses of the on-premise environment where customers have been building and running private clouds, and the best of the public cloud, which is AWS. And as Andy Jassy once said, there's no compression algorithm for experience. And we've been in the market collaborating together, jointly engineering this platform for more than 5 years now. And you'll see a timeline across the bottom of the slide here that shows some of the innovations and launches that we've done over the last few years. Just at our annual customer conference, VMware Explore, a few weeks ago in San Francisco, there were additional announcements and product enhancements, which you're going to hear from Puneet just shortly. And just to name a few of them, if you look at the more recent timeline, we've been expanding the number of regions where VMC and AWS is available globally and here in APJ. But we've also launched new service capabilities such as VMware Cloud on AWS Outposts. So for customers wanting to run a hybrid environment that have low latency application requirements, or maybe want to deploy services in a region where there's no VMware Cloud region available, you can deploy a portion of the AWS infrastructure in your data center today and get all the benefits of both AWS and VMware Cloud. So we've been bringing together the best of these two capabilities. Now, when we talk to customers about what their cloud journey has been like, AWS has been pioneering this for a number of years. And if you go back, 12 years, customers started to talk about having this kind of cloud-first approach. And that was really focusing on building new engagement apps, front office apps, mobile apps, and how do you leverage cloud technology to deliver these capabilities out to your customers and your employees. And one of the things that was a big issue was the lack of cloud skills available that are in the market and the need to adapt the wider enterprise or the wider business operating model to support cloud technologies. If you fast forward to where we are today, about 80% of the customers we talk to today are in this next phase. When they've moved from this kind of cloud-first approach, and they've been looking at replatforming, even refactoring some applications, they've chosen AWS as their chosen cloud provider, but they still want to run some amount of their applications on-premise. It's what we call cloud chaos, and many CIOs we're talking today are talking to us about this environment of chaos, where they may actually be using a number of SaaS applications, or because of mergers and divestitures, they may have inherited parts of their business which could be running on other hyperscaler platforms. And so whilst there's more choice in the market today, it's created additional complexity. And a lot of CIOs talk about this phase as the great replatforming. We've benefited from some cloud native applications. How do we now look at the rest of the environment and move that environment into a cloud environment? But it becomes challenging because you have disparate apps in different locations, different operating models, and you need to be able to run a consistent level of operations and management across that and gain insights for what you're doing. Now, separately from this talk, VMware has a cloud management, cloud health suite called Aria, which has just been rebranded, which gives you that full end-to-end single pane of glass, enabling you to manage and get insights on your applications across your private, edge, and public clouds. So that's one of the things that we're talking to customers about. But from a cloud infrastructure perspective, we're talking to customers today about being digitally smart, but how do you get to cloud smart? And that's really about choosing the right migration strategy for your applications. Most of you have probably heard about the Gartner's 6 R's, and working with AWS, we talk about 7 R's, the 7th one being relocate, which is, do you really need to rehost or replatform your applications into a native environment if you're not intending to refactor them? And actually, does it make more sense just to relocate those applications? If they're already running on a VMware vSphere-based environment, then you can actually move those with very, very little risk, maintain the same level of security, and get moving much, much more quickly. And of course, it co-locates you next to those native services. And so that enables you to extend your consistent operating model on-prem and operations into the AWS environment. So VMware Cross-Cloud Services, I won't be touching on all of these. If you look across the top 2 here, we're helping customers build modern applications, Kubernetes containerized applications, which you can run in your VMware environment on-prem, and you can move those into VMC and AWS, and we're providing that consistent management plane across those environments. Now, if you start to look across the other elements of this, and you look at the VMware Cloud and AWS use cases, the 5 most common ones stretch across these. Now, what do these enable for customers? Here are some of the common enablers. Now, if you talk about building next generation applications, using VMware Tanzu services, customers like Stagecoach in the UK were able to go within 3 weeks to launch a VMC and AWS platform, software-defined data center in AWS, and actually start building Kubernetes-based applications, and they are actually able to accelerate their production and getting production apps to market much, much more quickly. Probably the 2 biggest use cases that we're seeing is obviously accelerating cloud migrations and DC extension. And to give you a couple of examples of customers that we've really helped, not just here in ASEAN, but across the region in APJ. If you look at the highest number of use cases we have, it's accelerating in public sector, especially in Australia and New Zealand, and also in regulated industries like banking and insurance. So if you take the example of MLC Insurance in Australia, they had a legacy data center environment that was being provided by a managed data center provider. They needed to exit that data center by January of this year. They engaged in a conversation with us at the end of March last year. We came up with a design, we'd completed assessments by September, and between September and January, we enabled them to fully exit their data center in just a matter of 4 months. So going back to kind of the title of the session today, we absolutely are doing this with customers today in heavily regulated environments. And some of the benefits that they were able to gain from was the fact that they could maintain IP addressing as they move from on-prem into cloud. You can set up a layer 2 extension. Using a hybrid cloud extension, you can drive batch migrations, or you can even use vMotion to move live production apps whilst they're running. So it really accelerated their path, reduced risk, and maintained security. Now, if you talk about adding capacity and DC extensions, we're now thankfully coming out of the other end of COVID, but throughout there, if you take customers like UOB here in Singapore, who needed to provide more virtual desktop services for their remote users working at home, they were able to scale and expand using VMware Cloud and AWS to scale up and scale down the number of VDI desktop users that they had to support during COVID. And that's actually one of the more common use cases we're seeing across APJ at the moment. But we'll dive into those in a little bit more detail, such as disaster recovery and how you can use VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery to protect you against things like ransomware, which is an increasing threat for a lot of our customers. And ultimately, bringing the combination of VMware and AWS together is helping accelerate enterprise cloud transformation. So to give you a visual on kind of what this looks like, this here would be kind of a typical approach to modernization that customers would take when they're thinking about moving into AWS, and the steps they would take when they're looking to go to cloud native services. They have an existing VMware-based environment on the left, and then they go through a number of iterative steps through a carefully structured process that AWS use in order to look at the environment, discover it, align it to the business outcomes, create the cloud economics business case, engage a partner, train your team, and then set up the migration to get access to AWS native services. Now, using VMC and AWS, what you're able to do is essentially replicate your VMware-based environment on AWS bare metal infrastructure using vSphere, vSAN, and NSX, which is our VMware Cloud Foundation, and it essentially becomes an extension of your on-premise data center. There you see we set up the hybrid cloud extension between on-prem and the AWS region, and then you get a 100 gigabit connection between your SDDC in VMC and AWS and native services. So the advantage a lot of customers see with this is it enables them to move very, very quickly, get out of the data center, and then once they have their workloads in VMC and AWS, they can take a more measured approach as to how and which applications they choose to modernize, whether they do that within the VMC environment or whether they want to plug into EKS or ECS and many other AWS native services that they want to leverage. So it really is kind of that simple. Now, there are other benefits that kind of come with this, which is today, if you're managing your environment, there's a huge stack of elements that you're managing across both the physical, software, and virtual layers. As you move to VMC on AWS, it's a fully managed service provided by VMware. And so as you move across to the right, you're actually lowering your overhead, which means you can free up your team from undifferentiated heavy lifting and have them focused on more value-creating activities in the organization. And the important thing here is the time to stand up additional capacity and environment can be done in 2 hours when you're on VMC and AWS. So we know a lot of the challenges today in terms of supply chain and getting access to hardware and chips. Actually, once you've got your VMware Cloud and AWS environment stood up, it enables you to provision and deploy applications much, much more quickly. Now, obviously the focus here is on APJ. We've got the service available in nearly all AWS regions. We've just launched, in yellow there, you'll see the Hong Kong region. We have a lot of customers asking us about using geodiversity and running their environments across multiple AWS availability zones and regions. So we've just launched Hong Kong. We are working with AWS on the Jakarta region, which they just recently launched to get VMC enabled there. But most of the customers we have in this region are running out of our Singapore region. Now, importantly, across the bottom there, we've just gotten our MTCS Singapore government certification. We've also gotten IRAP in Australia assessed, ISMAP in Japan, and there's a number of ISO and other certifications that we've got in public sector, for example, things like OSPAR. So we're working very hard on a lot of the certifications that support customers such as yourselves leveraging this service and working with AWS more extensively. So I'm now going to hand over to Puneet, who's going to double click and go a little bit deeper in some of the new innovations and announcements, and I'll be speaking to you again shortly. Thanks.
Thank you, Sanjay. So, thank you, everyone. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, first of all, taking out time and being part of this session. As Sanjay said, I'm going to be doing a double click and double down on some of the capabilities we offer with VMware Cloud and AWS. Sanjay broadly spoke about some of the use cases we have really seen enterprises using VMware Cloud and AWS for. But the first step first, VMware Cloud and AWS is slightly different than other hyperscaler offerings. So essentially, you're not consuming directly virtual machines and EKS services. It's a host-based offering. So essentially, you plan a host in your on-prem environment, you go ahead and plan for a host in VMware Cloud on AWS, and then you have a choice to create applications of custom size. So we don't provide you a t-shirt size application. You can pack in as many virtual machines as you want on these hosts. There's no limitation on that. And the configuration of those virtual machines could be decided by you based on your application requirements. So that's one primary difference. Having said that, if we have different profile of applications, we would need to provide different type of instances or bare metal under the hoods. So we have we had two type of bare metal instances to choose from. One is i3, which is more appropriate for journal purpose workloads. So traditional web servers, app servers could be hosted on i3 instances. And you can see one i3 instance is essentially 36 cores, 512 gig RAMs, and about 10 terabyte raw capacity for you to host your workloads on that. And you can have multiple of such to form a cluster and then spin up your application stack over it. We also had i3 Enhanced, which is i3 EN, which is more appropriate for storage intensive workloads like your databases. So you want to host your Oracle applications or Oracle databases or SQL databases, you can actually use i3 EN for that. We very recently announced in the recent VMware Explore a new instance type, which is i4i instance, which is more compute intensive. So for applications which are memory intensive, for example, in-memory databases, HANA, etc., are good candidates to be hosted on i4i. Now, how do you make a choice, right? I mean, we have a choice, but how do you really plan for this? We have a public sizer. You can definitely reach out to your VMware counterparts, but then there's a public sizer where you can just enter the application profiles, how much resources you want, what kind of application profiles you have, and this public sizer will automatically churn out what instance is more appropriate for you to host your applications. You can have a mixed bag, you can have dedicated clusters, all sort of options are possible. Moving on, this is one of the most important use case which we have really seen in this particular region, especially after the COVID. We have seen a lot of enterprises coming back to us asking if they can have a DR platform in cloud, which is more on demand in nature, because everyone wants a DR, but we all understand that having a DR, especially in cloud or on-prem, it requires some sort of upfront investment, and a lot of businesses are not in a good shape to invest upfront, which is why VMware really worked on this solution where we sort of came up with a solution where you can consume DR capability in cloud, and it is more on-demand in nature, so sort of cost optimized for you to consume. So essentially what we do is we take backup of all your data on-prem into a cloud storage capacity, and then using automated orchestrated workflows, you can actually fail over that data which is backed up in cloud to a compute capacity, which is VMware Cloud powered compute capacity in an on-demand fashion. So imagine a scenario, you strike a failover or you want to do a DR drill, just spin up a VMware Cloud on-demand basis. Sanjay mentioned it only takes 2 hours to stand up an environment. So just stand up an environment on demand, fail over your workloads, do the DR drill, do the DR testing, and once you are done with that, using the same orchestrated workflows, you can fail back your applications on-prem, right? So essentially, you have an on-demand DR solution where you don't really need to remutate your application stack or convert the application formats. Just take a backup, do failover, and bring them back whenever required. Now, this is offered by something called as VMware Cloud DR service, or VCDR in short. But VCDR is not just a backup solution or a replication DR solution. It also offers ransom protection for ransomware attacks. So a lot of time we have really seen, especially in financial segment and even in public sector, a lot of enterprises are struggling to prevent ransomware attacks, and they're looking for solutions which can help mitigate that risk. So VCDR also offers ransomware recovery. So there is an embedded behavior analysis algo which constantly keep monitoring the backup of data which we take on cloud. And if there is a threat which is detected, it automatically flags the identified recovery candidates. As an operator, you have a choice to quarantine those identified candidates so that the infection doesn't spread across to all other applications. And then there is a capability of threat remediation where you can pick up a good known restore point from past and restore your application image to a old restore point. So that's an additional capability for ransomware recovery, which you can also leverage as an additional capability. Now, talking about VMware Cloud on AWS in a little more details, as I said, VMware Cloud on AWS is almost the same building blocks of what you have as an architecture on-prem. So traditionally on-prem, you'll have an external storage, you have some compute nodes, you'll have some networking gear. A very similar architecture is what VMware Cloud on AWS offers in cloud, but in a form of HCI nodes. So HCI is hyper-converged infrastructure. Apologies for that. So essentially, these are nodes which have compute capacity and storage capacity bundled into one physical box. And using VMware software-defined data center stack like vSphere, vSAN, and NSX, we layer compute virtualization, network and security virtualization, and storage virtualization over and above that. Right? So essentially, in a traditional VMware Cloud on AWS environment, if you have to, let's say, expand storage independently, that was not a choice earlier. So you have to add additional nodes, which would expand the storage capacity, but may not be relevant because you would still have to buy additional compute capacity, not required over cost. So VMware recently announced independent storage capacity options for expansion. So if you already have a VMware Cloud on AWS setup, you can expand additional storage capacity by two offerings we have. One is called as VMware Cloud Flex Storage, which is a VMware managed storage capacity option, which essentially allows you to carve out storage blocks in cloud, and you can map it as an NFS data store to existing VMware cluster in cloud. Or you can also leverage FSxN, which is an AWS managed storage capacity based on NetApp ONTAP cloud file systems, which you can map to an existing VMware Cloud clusters as well. And both these options are available for integration with VMware Cloud on AWS service. Okay, so Sanjay spoke about resiliency. That's one of the key drivers when you are doing cloud adoption. And how does VMware cater to the resiliency requirement? VMware Cloud on AWS, Sanjay showed you, is available across many regions, and every region, if you know, would have multiple availability zones. So when you spin up a VMware Cloud on AWS service, you have a choice to choose the availability zone you want to spin up this service into. So for example, in Singapore, we have 3 availability zones. So when you spin up a VMC service in Singapore, you can choose which availability zone you would want to spin this up into. And when you spin up this service, you can choose this service to be a single availability zone service, which offers you a 3.9 SLA uptime. But if your applications require higher resiliency, they are more critical in nature, you are sort of looking for zero downtime of the application in an event of AZ failure, we also can deploy VMC across AZs using a stretch cluster architecture. So essentially, we can have VMC spread across all the 3 AZs, and we can give you a higher level of SLA commitment for that architecture. Now, talking about VMware Cloud on AWS, and Sanjay spoke about, and going back to the title, the migration. We spoke about migration. Sanjay gave you some snippets about how fast we moved migration. With VMware Cloud on AWS, we have various methodologies to do the migration. And let me just complete the slide to talk through them. So essentially, if you see, VMware has various migration methodologies using which we can make your applications or virtual machines move from your on-prem environment to VMware Cloud on AWS. But essentially, there are 3 methods of migrations. One is live migration, which is like no downtime. You really want to move your applications over to cloud with zero impact, zero downtime, and that's most difficult to achieve, right? Then you have minimal downtime capabilities where you probably just reboot your applications in cloud. So you replicate the content and then a minimal downtime. So you reboot your applications and they are up there. And the last one is the cold migration, which is the most commonly used methodology where you sort of take a backup of whatever you have on-prem, then shift the capacity to, or the data to cloud environment, and then you bring up the workloads there. Now, VMware has this secret sauce called as VMware HCX, which is offered as a migration engine along with VMC. So when you subscribe to VMC service, you get this capability called as VMware HCX, which allows all the 3 migration methodologies. And most commonly used migration methodology is basically the live and the warm migration. So Sanjay spoke about a customer in Australia, which essentially used the live migration and warm migration capabilities to migrate workloads over weekends. So hundreds of virtual machines packed together in one migration wave were migrated out using these live migration methodologies. And that's powered by HCX. So dwelling a little deeper on HCX, essentially HCX is a service which allows you to connect your on-prem environment to VMware Cloud and AWS environment by setting up an IPsec VPN tunnel between the 2 environments. And it's a secure state tunnel, also provides you WAN optimization capabilities so that when you're migrating the data over, a lot of network deduplication and storage deduplication happens, which makes the migration process faster. HCX also allows you to stretch your layer 2 networks. So essentially, all the layer 2 network segments you have created in your on-prem environment, we can just simply stretch them over to VMware Cloud on AWS. So what that means is when you're moving over applications, you don't have to bother about changing the IP addresses or security policies attached to those applications. You can bring the applications along with the network and security policies along with that. The other methods of connecting your on-prem environment to cloud also has options of Direct Connect. So you all know about Direct Connect. I'm assuming Direct Connect is basically a point-to-point service provided by AWS to connect your on-prem environment to cloud. So we can definitely leverage that. It's a high bandwidth, low latency link with quality of service controls. So you can actually go ahead and use that to connect to VMC environment. Or if you do not have a Direct Connect service in your environment, you can also leverage the standard IPsec VPN tunnels, which are over open internet. So we can support that as well. The process for setting up HCX is pretty simple. On the right-hand side, where you have VMware Cloud on AWS, you just have to enable that service, right? It's a VMware managed service, so you just enable the service and all the configurations automated, so that will get automatically set up. But on the left-hand side, which is your on-prem environment, we have simple virtual appliances, which can be imported from our public websites. And when you do that, you just run them as standard virtual machines along with your other applications, enable a couple of ports in the backend firewall, enable a couple of ports in the front-end firewall, and that will allow you to do a site pairing between the 2 environments, which can then be used to set up the tunnel using which you sort of migrate over the workloads. Migration process is something which you can control. It's pretty straightforward with VMware Cloud and AWS. You can either choose single applications and single VMs and migrate them over, which is essentially a lengthy process, so we'll lose the benefit of HCX. So what we will do is we create migration waves or migration bundles. We identify applications which are can be grouped together in a single migration wave as a part of the planning exercise. We also have tool sets which allow you to do application dependency mapping. So you can define the dependency of application A over application B and then probably group them together in a single migration wave. And then like that, with that planning, you can create migration bundles or mobility groups, and then choose one of the migration methodology which I spoke about earlier to bring over these applications. You can do it in an on-demand fashion, or you can schedule it in a downtime window whenever you would want to have it. So pretty straightforward process, and this really has helped customers to migrate over hundreds of applications in almost mere weeks to cloud. Okay, last point before I jump into a demo to show you some things in action. VMware Cloud on AWS is not just a platform which allows you to create virtual machines, which is a traditional vSphere platform. It also allows you to create containerized workloads. So if you're following VMware vSphere announcements over the past few years, we now allow spinning up containers or microservices-based architecture with Kubernetes platform offered by VMware called as Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. That is also offered as part of VMware Cloud on AWS service. So if you subscribe to VMware Cloud on AWS service, what you get is not just the platform which offers you vSphere, vSAN, and NSX, but it also offers you managed Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, which means you can spin up a Kubernetes cluster and create microservices-based architectures, containers, and pods, and spin it over there. Your applications can be hosted in VMware. We also offer a management control plane for Kubernetes lifecycle management, which allows you to not just manage Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, but let's say you're using EKS service in AWS, you can manage that as well using the managed Kubernetes service. And now, quickly jumping onto the demo. It's a recorded demo, but it's from our live labs. So let me just give you a preface of the demo. It's a demo where we are having this application. It's a web server hosted in our Singapore lab, treated as an on-prem environment. Notice the IP address, it's ending with 30.31, and the web page shows the Singapore Marina Bay Sands photographs, right? What I'm gonna do is I have the Singapore environment connected to a VMware Cloud on AWS service in Sydney over an IPsec VPN tunnel, just how I explained in my previous slides. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show a live migration of this application without any downtime, and you'll see that application will move over to Sydney and would not even have an IP address change. So let me just quickly start the demo. So what I'm doing is I'm just refreshing this web page. You notice the application name is Alpha. I go to my HCX console, which is actually a plugin which can integrate with your vCenter, and then I choose the application I want to migrate over. Once I choose and click on Go, you would see the migration process would start. You can see I can actually run the migration live, or I can schedule it over for a weekend activity or my downtime window. And once I do that, you would soon see the application will start syncing the data from my on-prem environment to the cloud environment. Now, this is a demo, so obviously I've fast-tracked it, but in the real world, an application migration time taken is a factor of the size of the application and the bandwidth you have between the two environments. That's essentially what defines how much time it takes to fail over or actually move over the application to cloud. So in this case, you see it's pretty fast. I've already started syncing the application, and the switchover is happening now, right? And once the switchover is complete, what I'll do is I'll quickly jump onto the environment. You also see there's a lot of events captured, so it's quite verbose. You know what's happening in the background. You can actually troubleshoot it if there's a issue. So let me just go back to the web server, and I do a refresh the page. You notice the IP address has not changed, and the web page has changed to Sydney Opera House, which actually reflects that the application has moved to Sydney. So essentially that's demo. And just to quickly give you a glance of the customers who are using VMware Cloud on AWS service, a broad set of customers. Obviously, this doesn't reflect all, but this sort of reflects customers we have in the region, across the globe, from different sectors, different industries who have used VMware Cloud on AWS for a lot of such use cases. So potentially that gives you a confidence that it's not like a service which we have just launched. It's a service we have been running for the last 5 years and pretty mature and great enhancements. With that, I hand it over back to you, Sanjay. Thank you.
Thanks, Puneet. Thanks, and great demo and good insight around the technology and how we're continuing to innovate. So just got a couple of wrap-up slides, and as Puneet says, these customers here don't reflect all of the customers we're working with, as we don't have permission to use all of them, but certainly in some offline conversations we can give you more insights around some of the use cases these customers are using. We've touched on the main ones. So I guess wanted to kind of summarize. This is actually part of an IDC study that the AWS and VMware worked with IDC on, and it kind of draws together some of the things that we've been talking about. From a TCO perspective, when we typically do assessments, AWS does it as well as VMware. We go and categorize a customer's applications, and we typically find 50 to 55% of those are relatively easy to move, whether you use rehost, replatform, or as we're talking about today, relocate. And normally I would say probably around 20% of a customer's applications fall into the refactor bucket, where you actually want to modernize and change those applications. So what we talk to customers about is how do you actually focus on moving first the vast majority of your applications, which helps you drive a lower cost and drive savings, which you can then invest into refactoring. And refactoring, whilst it's important, there's been a number of studies done. I mean, IDC did a study that said to refactor 100 applications would take on average 7.5 years, 7.4 years actually. And so whilst we know customers are wanting to modernize applications to get to value more quickly, using VMC and AWS is a great way to accelerate that migration. So we can offer very cost competitive TCO, and actually working with AWS, some of the most compelling TCOs that we put together are actually a combination of VMC and native services. And we can work through that with you with our cloud economics teams. And then, we've touched on it in terms of the speed to get to cloud much more quickly. Typically what we see with customers is that what we call a migration bubble, that in order to get to the value and the benefit of cloud in terms of productivity, staff, operational resilience and agility and cost savings, there's an initial cost increase, and VMC and AWS shortens the cycle to move, so therefore it shortens that cost bubble. And so therefore across the bottom there you'll see a whole bunch of stats that came out of the report. So if you look up that IDC report, you can get more specifics on that. So in terms of how you get ready for kind of the modern hybrid cloud and getting digitally smart, the first thing is to kind of understand your environment. Contact the VMware team or the AWS team. We'll work together to help you understand, what applications we would recommend you move into which bucket, and where you have vSphere-based workloads, which ones are right to be able to use VMC for. We'll go through and analyze that, working with you. We'll take your cost inputs and we'll build a cloud economics business study so that you can use that internally to kind of create the case for change and create the excitement and create the case to move. And then in terms of experience, we can actually do a funded POC, both AWS or VMware. And what we like to do often once we've defined a scope is to help you stand up a POC environment, a pilot environment. And many customers actually take that pilot environment and it becomes their production environment. So those are kind of 3 pretty simple steps. That pretty much draws everything to a close. We do have a quiz. If you want to scan the QR code, please go and do that. But we've left 5 minutes at the end in case there's any live questions from the room. I think there's some mics. If you do have a question, please put your hand up or take photos of the scan code, either or both. Okay, I think most of you have got that. So thank you for your time. Thanks for attending. There's 5 minutes if there are any questions. Happy to take those. If not, thank you for your attendance.